The Black Hand of Death by the Prowler. His name is Anthony Tapiotella, nicknamed the Black Hand of Death. He is connected, a made man, the head enforcer for the Gagliano family. And whenever they have a problem, whenever family business is threatened, he is who they call upon to solve it. Impossible tasks he is given, but no matter how impossible they may seem, he handles them with ease. No matter the protection, no matter the location, when he's tasked to eliminate a target, he carries it out to a T. Capiche? He moves in and out of the shadows as if he was born to it. He travels silently on a gust of the wind. He is successful because he's the best. But what makes him better than the rest? Is he stronger than the rest? More agile? More cunning, perhaps? Compared to his peers, I would say not in particular. Maybe he's the best at what he does and can carry out tasks no one else can. Because he's dead. Killed in an ambush 5 years ago by his own family, on the orders of his jealous boss. It was over a woman who chose the affections of Anthony, even becoming his fiancée. In reality, it wasn't even a choice between the two men for Maria. She and Anthony were an item from the start. They shared an instant connection and bond that could never be broken. Anthony's boss, however, Big Don Palermo, of the Palermo family, had delusions running through his head that he could woo her just because he was the boss. Even though she paid him no attention, a fantasy formed in his head that she was his and that she secretly wanted him if it wasn't for Anthony's existence. That's when Big Don conceived of the plan to dispose of Anthony once and for all. A select few were chosen to carry out the hit, and even fewer were involved in the planning. Everyone in the know, however, was against the decision. They knew the reason for the hit, and it just didn't sit well with everyone that they were getting rid of the family's best hitman because the boss had delusions over another man's fiancée. Everyone went along with the plan, though, because they didn't want their next to be the next on the chopping block. A ruse was conceived, and Anthony believed he and a few other hitmen were to break into the suite of the landmark hotel and assassinate the boss of the Zitolo family, who at the moment was shacked up with his mistress. Once there, they busted through the front doors to the suite and made their way to the bedroom. As they made their way, Anthony began to think something was off. He wasn't the best at his job for nothing after all. Where are his guards? Anthony thought. A boss of a family wouldn't travel without protection. He was distracted, however, after hearing a loud thud come from behind the door of the suite. He moved to the front of the team of hitmen that were with him and pressed his ear to the door. He turned his head back towards the others and raised his fingers to his lips, gesturing them to be quiet. It sounded like they were fooling around in there. Anthony then took a step back and kicked in the door, unleashing a clip from his machine gun into the bed as he stepped into the room. When he removed his finger from the trigger and standing in the silence, he realized the bed was empty. He was in shock. He heard a slight moan again come from his right. He turned his head and saw it was the TV. He was playing an adult movie. He stood there confused, then heard a few faint laughs behind him, followed by the distinct sound of the guns being cocked. He knew in that moment this was a setup. He just didn't understand why. His Maria flashed through his mind at that moment, afraid he'd never see her again. A voice spoke from behind him. "The boss says hello." Anthony tried to quickly turn and dispose of the men behind him, but he wasn't quick enough. The ambush was complete. Anthony lay dead. His body was barely in the morgue when Big Don made his first move on the grief-stricken Maria, who was crying uncontrollably in the hospital waiting room, being held in the arms of her mother. But she wanted no part of him. She wanted no part of anyone. Big Don felt disrespected. He didn't understand her grief. He didn't understand her devastating sadness. His delusions clouded his reason. He grabbed her by the shoulders and menacingly said, "What I did for you tonight, what I did for us, I should be met with gratitude and love, not disrespect. You don't have to act for these people. Everyone knows there was only one thing keeping us from being together, and everyone knows we should be together." Maria looked shocked and confused. Everyone in the room did. She then began to get angry. She shouted at him and ran towards him, screaming, "What have you done? What have you done?" As she beat her arms against his chest, Big Don became even more enraged, shouting, "You know exactly what I did. I got rid of the distraction. I cleared the obstacle. Get your mind right, sweetheart, and take your place by my side." Maria shouted back, which only angered Big Don even further. The scene was getting out of control. A few of the men in the room had to separate the two, quickly ushering out Big Don when the detective showed up to collect statements. No one in the room talked, not even Maria. There was a code they all lived by, and she was part of that way of life. She understood the rules. Everyone in that waiting room sat in shock, and with a growing sense of anger. Big Don basically admitted to being the cause of Anthony's demise. They wanted justice, but they kept their mouths shut. They knew eventually karma would catch up to Big Don. That kind of betrayal usually never goes unanswered, and Maria would make sure of that. The following week she went into seclusion, reading books on the occult, finding a way to bring her love back to life, all the while trying to keep the delusional Big Don at bay, who, by this time, was becoming more disturbed and angry by the second. The situation came to a head on the 2-month anniversary of Anthony's murder. Maria asked Big Don over to her house for a talk. He of course agreed and made his way there. When he arrived, she ushered him into the living room and offered him a seat on the couch, while she went to get the wine and meal she had prepared. They sat and ate, talking and drinking throughout the night. It pained her to do this, having to sit and listen to his boring, ridiculous stories and his nerve-grating laugh. But she played the good little actress. This was all but a means to an end, a distraction, a ruse. As Big Don was distracted, rambling on with an egotistical story, Maria grabbed the steak knife from her plate of food, and when he started laughing at one of his own jokes, she took the knife and plunged it into his chest. There was a problem, however. Big Don was named Big Don for a reason. He was significantly larger than the typical man, and while this wound would have killed an ordinary man, it was just a flesh wound for Big Don. He looked on in shock and anger. Maria appeared to be in a state of fear as she realized her attack had failed. She ran to her room screaming. He let out a pained grunt as he pulled the knife from his chest and followed her to the room. He kicked the door in and was greeted with a room full of lit candles. Maria was in the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of candles and chanting in an unknown language. She was trying to summon her Anthony. In her research the past 2 months, she recently found a way to bring him back. But it required a sacrifice she was all too happy to make: her life. A lover's revenge would bring Anthony back, and Big Don fell right into her trap. He moved towards her and plunged the knife into her stomach, stabbing repeatedly and screaming his delusions as he did. Maria continued chanting her incantation the entire time, not even stopping when the knife entered her body each time he plunged it in. As she lay dying, encircled by her candles, she whispered the spell one last time, and as the last syllable left her lips, a moan was said to have emanated from the cemetery, followed by a hand reaching up through the soil. It was a moan people claimed to have heard for miles, a moan filled with immense sorrow and pain, and uncontrolled anger. The spell had worked. Anthony was back, and he was looking for revenge. Big Don went into hiding. Some say he heard Anthony's moans of pain and anger, and it frightened him. But only he knows for certain. After Anthony unearthed himself, he left the cemetery, seeking help from his cousin Julian, an enforcer for the rival Gagliano crime family. After the initial shock and awe, and convincing that he wasn't crazy, Julian took Anthony to meet his boss, Carlo the Tip Ruggiero. At first, everyone was frightened. They all knew Anthony was morgue meat, and they knew him standing before them all was some supernatural witchcraft that shouldn't be trifled with. After a sit-down, however, they reached an understanding and a mutual agreement that worked for everybody. Anthony swore allegiance to the Gagliano family and became their top enforcer, and they supplied him with everything and anything he needed. Over the next month, he hunted down and disposed of everyone that was involved in his betrayal. Actually, he laid waste to his entire former family. There was only one person left, his former boss, the cause of all his pain, Big Don Palermo. Anthony tracked down his cowardice ex-boss to one of his hideouts on the outskirts of town, an office inside the old meatpacking plant. The story goes, Big Don shit himself when he first laid eyes on the resurrected Anthony, his once loyal enforcer. It didn't get too much better for old Don after that. Anthony took his time. The torture process was long and slow. He sliced and cut away parts off of him one by one. He left him for the world to see, looking like a human Picasso, a mismatch of parts where they shouldn't be. He left a canvas of pain in his wake. Now the job was complete. What he was summoned to do was over. He could now rest in peace, for he had gotten his revenge. The Bathhouse by Bobby Dangerously. For years, the mob hitmen have been using this warehouse as a place to securely dispose of their contracted hits. They call it the Bathhouse. It's a small warehouse on the Lower West Side, just along the tracks on the way out of town. It sits above the river that leads to the ocean. It's just a warehouse that holds 7-foot crates, many of them, in fact. It's a dusty place with a heavy air feel. If you enter, you may never leave. Alive, that is. What's in the crates is what keeps these hitmen in business. The hitmen work for all the families, a union, so to speak. No one messes with these men, as they are very vicious and uncontrollable. They are contract killers, not necessarily connected to any one family. They like it that way, as they won't be tied to anyone other than themselves. This leaves them untouchable, as they get great respect for the way they work and keep the politics of mob life out of their work. They just kill, plain and simple. Tonight was another contract. 2 of the hitmen had brought an unfortunate to the warehouse. He committed a crime amongst the family. He snitched and was caught doing so. So the hitmen were hired to rub him out. They found the snitch and brought him to the warehouse after they beat him senseless. But they have not killed him yet. The hitmen like to put out a message to the other mobsters who may work against the mob and put scares into them. So their way of killing is horrific. The beaten snitch was put into a crate, tied up, and laying there. A small machine started to roll, and a chute was brought to the crate, and concrete was coming out of the machine and started filling up the crate. The snitch started screaming, "Not the bath!" But it was too late for any more screams. The concrete quickly covered him up to his eyes, as his head was propped up just enough that the concrete covered his nose and mouth, but not his eyes. This way he was able to see the killers looking down at him until he died. After he died, the hitmen covered the open part of the crate and sealed it. Then a truck pulled back, and the crate was rolled up onto the truck, and the truck left the warehouse. The truck drives out of town and loads the crates onto a boat, and then it's taken to the ocean and dumped. Clean kill, and no evidence on land that would get them caught. It doesn't hurt that the cops are paid off as well. No sneaky police in this area, or Coast Guard. It's a good business. This has gone on for years. Many hits are all done the same way. Some non-mob members have been put away that needed to be as well. Cops, lawyers, store business owners, etc. The bathhouse is ran by 10 of these hitmen. All are rich now and really don't need to do this, but they are sinister and love to do it just to do it. Another contract was on, and the hitmen were on their way. This was a man who was not allowing the mob to control his store and wasn't paying the mob any protection money or percentages. So he was to be killed, as was his family. The hitmen brought in the man and his wife. As they lay in the crates, the hitmen heard the woman speaking in tongues and didn't understand. They didn't care, as they thought it was just a prayer before she died. The hitmen started the bath of concrete, and at the moment, the light in the warehouse went out. The hitmen started asking, "What is going on?" They were feeling uneasy, and even for hitmen, a little scared. At the moment, they started seeing glowing floating objects, and some were flying right past the hitmen. The air felt cold to the hitmen, and winds were blowing even though the doors were shut. As the hitmen started feeling uneasy, The objects took form, and the hitmen noticed that they looked like all of the hits they committed over the years. All of the people's spirits that were killed in the bathhouse were still here. They never had left. What was needed was someone who can let them free. The wife, who was supposed to be the next victim, was an occultist and felt the energy in the bathhouse and released them. The hitmen were now being pushed back by the spirits, as if a crowd was moving against the two hitmen. The hitmen are now scared to death and passed out. The wife and husband, now out of the crates, put the two hitmen into the crates and filled them with concrete. The hitmen were covered now up to their necks. They both awoke and saw the husband and wife store owners standing with 100+ spirits of the dead that they have killed. The hitmen screamed and screamed for their lives. The spirits moaned a loud groan, and the concrete started again and covered the hitmen fully. They died, as they have killed many in the same way. The woman, now speaking to the spirits, the hundreds of them, asked if they would like to be released. One spoke and said no. She nodded, and they waited for the rest of the hitmen to come to the bathhouse for their contracted hits. Unknowingly, they will be the ones taking a bath. The Secret Surface. Benny Coins Martelli always believed Lake Mead was his perfect confessional, deep, dark, and silent, a place where secrets stayed sunk. He'd stand on the edge of the water at night, the desert wind brushing his coat, and listen to the soft lapping as each weighted body slipped beneath. No echoes, no witnesses, just Benny and the moon. But the desert has its own kind of memory. Decades later, the lake began to shrink. Tourists called it climate change. Locals called it bad luck. Benny called it impossible. Yet every news report showed the same grim spectacle, rusted barrels rolling out of the mud like bones pushed through skin. First one, then another, then another. He tried to ignore the pit forming in his gut. He was old now, gray and wheezing, retired in a house too big for a man with no family. The past, he told himself, was a thing nobody cared about anymore, until the first barrel he'd ever dumped was found. The headline used his old trademark, 3 coins taped to the victim's mouth. A calling card he thought clever at the time. He read the article twice, hands trembling like brittle leaves. He barely slept that night, drifting in and out of dreams where waterlogged hands clawed at the shore. The next morning, a knock rattled his door. Hard, too familiar. He froze. No one knocked like that anymore. When he opened it, there was no one outside, just a dark, wet footprint on the tile. Too large, toes splayed as if broken. More knocks followed in the days after, always sudden, always empty, always followed by mud tracked across his floors. At night, he heard the scrape of something heavy dragging down the hallway, slow and wet. Sometimes he smelled the lake, algae, rot, stale air. Then came the voice. It rose from the walls like water seeping through cracks, gurgling, choking, furious. Benny. He barricaded himself inside the bedroom, gun trembling in his hand, but the voice slid beneath the door, dripping into the room, filling the corners like fog. You thought we'd stay down forever. He knew those voices, every one of them, men he'd silenced, men who now rose with the receding lake. The house grew colder. Water pooled around his feet, inch by inch, though the floorboards were dry. From the darkness at the foot of his bed came a sloshing sound, followed by the metallic scrape of a barrel tipped over. A hand emerged first, bloated and pale. Fingers snapped at crooked angles, then another, then faces half sunk and peeling, eyes like hollow pits of silt. They crawled towards him in jerks and spasms, water pouring off their bodies, though they carried none with them. You left us in the dark, one croaked, coins clinking in his throat. Now, you'll keep us company. Benny's scream was swallowed as they closed in, dragging him down into a cold that wasn't water, but something deeper, something that never let go. By morning, his house was silent, and out on the shrinking lake, another barrel surfaced. One last hit by Bobby Dangerously. It's not real. It can't be, Johnny thought to himself as he is running through the dark alleyway of a street city. His heart is pounding as he is overweight and running for his life. He is not used to a hit going badly. Actually, this is not an ordinary hit. This was a boss, but a contract is a contract. As Johnny ducks behind a dumpster, he can't stop breathing heavily as he is scared out of his mind. He talks to himself in a low breath, saying, I just needed this last one. I could retire to the islands. Johnny peeks around the dumpster. The alleyway is dark, except a lamp-lit areas every 20 feet. As he looks, he doesn't see anything. He thinks to himself, is it safe? Johnny decides to get back up and make a run for it. He's about halfway there to the city street. He believes he can make it. As he gets up and starts to move, he looks back, and there it is. He lets out a small, shocking yelp and covers his mouth, as he doesn't want to show too much fear and look weak. But he can't help himself. He runs, but not toward the street. As between two buildings, it looks like a fence to an open field. It's closer than the street. Johnny knows the streets, and he knows he can get out quickly if he gets over the fence and runs through the cemetery. Big city, big life, and death right at the doorstep. As he makes it to the fence and hobbles over, he catches his pants on the top of the fence, and it tears the fabric and cuts his leg. He falls over and hits the ground hard. He gets himself up and runs through the headstones and hides behind a mausoleum. He leans his back against the wall and slides down for a second to catch his breath. He thinks to himself, why? Why me? I know I've killed many, but it's just business. He looks around the wall to see if he can see it. To his amazement, it is right in front of him. The boss's ghost. He lets out a scream and gets up and runs. He looks behind him with absolute fright as he's running. He wants to see how much distance he is getting between him and the boss's ghost. The ghost is right on him. It's such a ghastly-looking spirit. At that moment, Johnny falls into a hole and lands on the dirt below with a big thud, and he loses his breath. As he gets himself back together, he looks up and sees the ghost standing above him. The ghost makes a terrible shriek, laughs, and points to the headstone of the hole that Johnny is lying in. Johnny is scared out of his mind, as he now knows he is lying in a shallow grave. The ghost points and lights up the headstone so Johnny can see it. As he reads the headstone, it says, "Here lies Johnny, the Clip Carbone. May he enjoy his retirement." Johnny looks back at the ghost, and Johnny screams, "No!" Johnny wakes up breathing heavy and is sweating. As he comes out of sleeplessness, he felt relief, as it was just a dream. As he sat there upright in bed, he thought that after the hit of the boss, he was done. He looked over at the plane ticket on the nightstand and smiled. He thought he was done and can't wait for his retirement from this mob life. Then, at that moment, he heard a noise coming from the closet. He pulled the covers up to his face and saw the door open. The ghost of the boss was there. The ghost came closer to the bed. The spirit said, "Hi, Johnny. Enjoy your retirement." Johnny was about to scream, and then silence.